I'm actually curious to start from the beginning. I noticed when I was doing prep on you that even from a very young age, you were a very unique child. You had this fascination for traveling and visiting other countries, and you grew up in Wisconsin. So where did that come from? And maybe you can just take us back to some of those early memories that you have.
Sure. I am indeed from central Wisconsin. I'm from a small town called Stevens Point. And my mom told me recently that I used to walk around in the backyard and pretend that I spoke a foreign language. My family just spoke English, so I didn't have the fortune of having bilingual parents or anything like that. But I, at a very young age, had this curiosity. So when I was old enough, I biked to the library and I got books on tape and I taught myself French. That was one of the first languages I learned. And then I convinced my parents, again, at a very young age, I think I was 12 or 13, to let me be an exchange student in France.
Wow.
So I went and lived with a family in the south of France, learned to speak, really solidified the French. There's no better way to learn a language than to be completely immersed in it. And then came back and continued on, and then picked up German in college, and then went and studied in Austria. And then learned Arabic after events in the Middle East that started unfolding, and we needed more Arabic speaking officers in the government. So there you have it. That's the short end of how I learned my fascination with languages and life overseas. Once I lived in France, it was tough to even turn that off. You see what a big world it is, and it's just amazing. Every single corner of it. I've lived all over the world now with the government. I've lived in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and Europe. And it really has been a remarkable journey. And you see how much we're all the same. I think that's the takeaway, that doesn't matter where you are. We want what's best for our children. We want to live in a place that's safe. We all want to live in, and there's always going to be extremists in every country. But by and large, 99% of us are all pursuing that same dream.
I love that. And I'm just so fascinated because I also, as a kid, I feel so fortunate that I was able to travel a lot with my family. And so I always knew there was a bigger world outside of what we have, here in America. But, I definitely don't speak any other languages. So the fact that you were like, oh, let me just pick up German and then Arabic. Those are tough, tough languages. So it's so interesting to see how your brain works. And also, I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but seeing your fascination with travel and international cultures, you were able to foster this in your career. So did you know you wanted to go in the CIA? Like, how did that career path even start for you? Because it's such a unique stepping stone.
I think after I was overseas a little bit, I knew I wanted to do something international. So I really had my eyes on international business, international relations. My degree from college was international relations with French and German minors. So I definitely had my eyes overseas. And then my summers, I interned in Washington. I interned at the State Department. And then after I graduated, I went to work at the White House. So I had I had a scholarship to go to Princeton, but then I had a job offer at the White House. And I thought, oh my God, I loved the idea of living and experiencing, because by the time you're done with university, you've just done, but you're 22 years old. You've been studying your whole life. I couldn't wait to live. And I thought this opportunity was right in front of me and that I could go back and study more later. So I took the job at the White House and I did that. It's a very quick turnover rate usually at the White House, insofar as you're working really long hours. The pay isn't amazing. You're doing it for the privilege, and it is really exciting. I didn't love the White House for the aspect of, it was very much about whether you were a Democrat or Republican. A lot of the stuff in Washington, the phone calls you're getting, everything really is very polarizing. And that was even many years ago. That was several decades ago, whereas now it's far more polarizing. But the idea that it was always about trying to work the different angles with whether you were Democrat or Republican, trying to get enough votes. It's how our system works, which is fantastic. But I loved that when I went over to the State Department, I left the White House when I got my clearance for the State Department, that we were all working on the same team. Everybody at the State Department is working to move foreign policy forward for the US government, right? We're all on the same team, and that was really refreshing. And that was where it started. Then I worked at the Operations Center at the State Department. I delivered morning briefings to Secretary Powell and Secretary Albright. It was an incredible opportunity. And later on down the line, I got tapped on the shoulder for the agency.
Oh my gosh, incredible. And yeah, I could imagine just being on a united front, all working together, no polarizing views. That must have been so much more of a fun experience. And I mean, I'm not sure how much you can go into with your experience at the CIA, but I'd love to hear, are there any, I'm sure there's been so many pivotal experiences just from your journey there. You were there, I think over a decade or close to a decade. What are some of the things that you can share? And I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but you kind of have a life of being in the CIA pre-kids and then, being in the CIA post-kids, which we'll get into afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like when I was working with the government, I was in counterterrorism, and that was from both the State Department side and the agency side. And it was a very clear mission after 9/11. We were dedicated to keeping America safe. And we had to be right, or have to be right 100% of the time, right? And a lot of the leads we're following up, a lot of that stuff never necessarily makes it to the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, when you're stopping threats. So it's a very valuable mission. I was also in the Middle East collecting information on force protection, trying to keep our troops there safe. So there was a lot of really valuable information that was being collected to keep our country safe, keep our troops safe, try to keep ahead of everything that was going on. I think the world expects certainly the agency to know everything that's going on everywhere, but we're really a pretty small entity to be on the ground everywhere, reporting from everywhere. So it was a very interesting and unique perspective. I feel like I was invincible before I had kids. I really do have a very high risk tolerance, which I've learned over the years, or did.
How did you have that? Like, I walk down the street and I'm like looking behind me, making sure no one is doing anything crazy. Like, where did that come from? Because you truly were in such crazy circumstances, right? Like a bomb would go off right next to you. I mean, maybe you can share some of those instances and why you felt like you were invincible, which is just so amazing.
I think ever since I was little, and I have two brothers, and I used to climb the trees, and I would climb higher than them, and I would try to run faster than them. And I think I was that competitive side, but I also just didn't have that fear side of it. So when I was in Baghdad, I was in Baghdad before there was a green zone, and we were all staying out at the airport area. And just to get in and out of the airport, there's one road, and it was called RPG Alley. RPGs are rocket propelled grenades. So as you were leaving the airport area, there would be apartment buildings on each side that probably used to have the staff of the airport or live there. But now people could go up to the windows with an RPG and shoot them at our vehicles. And no level of armor would be able to sustain a direct attack from an RPG. Then as we continued on, when I was there, it was before Saddam Hussein was still alive when I was there. And it was very new after the invasion. And so then once you left the airport, then there were at least 1,000 IEDs or mines, improvised explosive devices, mines that you would have to, I would say, avoid, except if you did get hit with one. Again, there was no way that your level armor could sustain that. So then you get to the meeting, and then if something happens during the meeting, you also have to be very aware and try to stop that threat or get off the X in whatever case it may be. An interesting part of it is I know that once there was another case officer that showed up, and I was getting ready to leave Baghdad, and I was going with a meeting to him. And I remember that he was there and he was shaking. It was his first time leaving. And I thought, oh man, I should be more scared than I am. And I remember that just being profoundly aware of how nervous he was. At the time, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I really thought, this was very early after 9/11. So I think the mission was very pure. And I want to go back and say, I didn't have kids. And so I think when I did have my first son, it was really startling to see how vulnerable I felt. Do you have kids, Yasmin?
Not yet. No kids.
No. There is this moment of where you feel fearless and suddenly you think, oh my God, I have to be here to protect him. So it was an interesting juxtaposition from where I was before then. So it was a really big learning for me and shocking. But then after that, I did other tours that weren't as dangerous in other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And then they were still a lot more dangerous than I think what the average American probably deals with. But when you're comparing it to being in a war zone, it's a lot less dangerous. And I continued to do a lot of the counterterrorism in different capacities until it was 2013. And I was on a plane heading to a high threat meeting on an island in the Indian Ocean. And we hit a storm and the lights went off and people were screaming. And the plane was going sideways and it was heading toward the water. And we were in the brace position getting ready for impact. And all I could see were the faces of my three little boys. And I felt this profound sense of sadness that they were going to grow up without a mom. And I think that for me was a really pivotal moment when I decided I've done this for a while. I needed to do a change. I needed to start something new. And there's never a good time to start a company. Certainly not when you're living in East Africa and you have a full-time job and three little kids. But I started it, the moment I got back after sort of decompressing, I started to look for factories. I started to create a logo, a website, everything. And I did it as my side hustle, so to speak. When I would get home from work and I'd get the kids in bed, I would shut off my phone from 6 until 8. And then I would work after that once they were in bed. So it was a lot when I look back on that.
I have goosebumps just hearing. I'm sure that was such a profound experience in your life, like thinking I might not make it. You have 3 sons at the time that were young. I know you have 4 now, right? You have 4 sons. Yeah. So I can't even imagine as a mother what that would feel like. And it's so interesting, actually. I've been doing this podcast now for 4 years, and I would say so many of the women who have started businesses, there has been like a life altering event, maybe not to the detail of what like you had, but there's something, whether it was someone close to them passed away or just something that really reminded them of, you have only this one life. Like, what do you want to do with it? And it seemed like that moment was an aha moment for you to be like, I need to shift and do something else. And obviously the idea for the business came and, you were working on it in such unique circumstances. But tell me, what was the impetus for you to start this business? Like, how did you think about, all right, I want to start working on, luxury pajamas? Like, where did the idea come from?
It's funny that you mentioned you have one life to live. One of my favorite quotes is from Mary Oliver. What are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And I think when you put it in that perspective, it really changes where your goals are and what you want to be moving toward. So where did I get the idea for pajamas? I used to live in France. And when you live in France, you literally can go into the grocery store like Leclerc or Carrefour, and you can see these really cute pajamas for kids with little buttons, the sort of thing that I remember from when I was little. And you didn't see it as much on the US market. You saw it moving toward the tight fit pajamas for kids. And we started as a kids pajama company in 2015 when we launched. And so then I thought, okay, maybe I could sell enough pajamas to replace my government salary. I had figured out a number of pajamas and I was like, okay, that didn't seem insurmountable. I didn't start out thinking I'm going to have a multi-million dollar company. It wasn't my intent. It was, I am going to sell this many pajamas to keep myself safe for my children. And that was the underlying idea. Second to that is as I was going down this journey, I found out that there were all these regulations, US regulations, CPSC regulations that had to be followed for kids' pajamas. You have to be able to, from the age of 6 months all the way up to age 14, you have to be able to sustain a direct flame for 3 seconds without igniting. Okay. So that it changed. I came in the 70s when everybody was smoking and there were no regulations on the garments. So even 100% cotton doesn't pass that test without being dipped in chemicals. And that was something that I was 100% against. There was not going to be any chemicals on the sleepwear for my children. So we set out pioneering fabric that was made without chemicals, that was 100%. We used 100% cotton. We blended it with an inherently flame retardant fiber to create what we have now. And we've gotten better and better at it. And the first kids' pajamas were made in the same factory as firemen's uniforms because we really had to work with some of this specialized fabric.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then, so the first year when we finally got to launch, and it took a while because we had to test everything before we imported it. Then once we got to launch, it was amazing. We were in 200 stores within the first year.
Yeah. And I have a lot of questions there, but backing up before, I'm just trying to paint the picture a little bit. So I believe you're in East Africa. You still have this full-time job. You mentioned, you have young kids, you're working a few hours every day. You're putting that like one small step in front of the other. And you're thinking to yourself, I just want to get something out there to make my salary, which I know, at least from my understanding, the government doesn't pay so much money. So you're like, all right, let's make it approachable. I'll sell X amount. how did you even know what manufacturers to reach out to, what fabrics to get? Like, what did that look like in those early days when you're literally there, probably not even with great Wi-Fi, trying to figure all this out?
Well, I think it wouldn't have happened 10 years earlier. I think the timing is everything because there is so much that you could find even in 2013, 2014. There was so much available at your fingertips, even from your laptop in East Africa, which was unthinkable 10 years before. I remember we didn't have our first laptop at home until around 2008 or 2009. You know, you would use the computers at work and it was a lot more of a process to get the routers and then you had your dial up. So I do think that it was timing and that I could reach out and find factories. And I went in with a healthy, bit of skepticism. And I think when you live in developing countries, you know, everything is a negotiation. When you go to the
Sure.
market, you know, hey, how much do you want to pay for these eggs? Well, that's not what we're going to pay. It's really is very much a negotiation and that you have to go into factories with that as well. You go in, you negotiate, you trust but verify. So we had our samples sent. We reviewed samples, pricing. Every single thing was tied up early on. Like I didn't leave any room for error where I could. Certainly at the early stages where you were already, I had everything tested. It was sort of a slow process to get it going because of the specific requirements.
And how long did it take until you got that final product and then you guys were live and you launched the business? How long was that?
I want to say it was at least a year, maybe a year and a half. We had wanted to launch in holiday 2014, but we didn't pass all the tests we needed to. So we had to go back through the drawing board with the yarn content. So
That's
then we passed.
impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, 1 year, year and a half doing it as a side thing, right? I mean, that's pretty amazing in a new industry that you've never been in. So it just shows your relentlessness and the power of focus. Like when you want to get something done, like you will make it happen, whatever the circumstances will be. And I love that you said, you know, how things are so accessible these days. I was just talking to my husband the other day and I'm like, what a beautiful time to live in that we can create companies on Shopify so easily and we have social media. Like it's a completely different world to just get something out there. So just it kind of, I was reflecting back on that, just hearing your journey building the company. And so you mentioned, which is really, really impressive, like the first year you got into 200 stores. Tell me more about how you did that because that's quite the bit of awareness, right? Just with the first year launching.
Yeah, I think I had in my mind that once people discover our pajamas, they're going to go crazy about it. But the internet is vast, right? So it's not necessarily, I thought I'd hit go on the website and just, it would be discovered. But it
I've
was
heard that
not
a
quite
lot.
that magical. It is, I think there is that beauty of naivete when you aren't an expert in something or you don't know how it's going and you don't have these expectations. Because if you think about everything all the way through the point of now, it would be so daunting that you might never take the first step. So I think that was really an advantage that I had was once I hit the little launch button, you know, surprise, surprise, you know, we didn't sell thousands of pajamas the next day, but we did get really lucky in that there were people out there looking for things in this niche. So we stumbled upon an amazing store it was a store owner in Cape Cod who then referred us to her sales rep who was in Atlanta, who then was the sales rep for all the luxury children's stores throughout or certainly the Southeast and even the Northeast, which is why we got to be in 200 stores fairly quickly. And then it sort of spread from there. And we really did close a gap. There weren't a lot of those classic pajama sets and nightgowns that were sold in our price range and with such a high quality in the US at the time.
And from my understanding, you know, how are you funding the business? Like, what did it look like to fund your first PO? I know you mentioned the government salary isn't a lot. So what did that look like for you to get this off the ground?
Oh my goodness, the first wire transfer, I think I was very nervous because
Yeah.
it was out of our savings account. It was a direct transfer from our savings account to a bank account overseas.
Oh
And
my,
that
it's
is sort
always
of,
so
well,
scary.
one wild and precious life. And you have those moments that you're just thinking, God, I hope this works out because I mean, it was the bank account was not vast. Certainly, we didn't have the deepest pockets, but you know, I feel like I had done enough thorough research because it was my own money that by the time it got to that point, I was pretty confident we were going to get the product that we had in fact ordered.
And have you guys been self-funded or how have you guys thought about capital moving forward? Because you've been in business now for like close to 10 years almost.
Yeah, no, it's 100% founder owned still, completely self-funded. So it's been a wild 9 years, but the profits have gone back into the company and we just kept growing and growing and growing. So it's been, an adventure to say the least, going through, a global pandemic among many other things. So it's been an adventure to say the least.
I love that. And, I so appreciate that. And I love having women on the podcast who have been self-funded. Not to say that raising money is bad. It's just, it depends on your situation, what you're building, your preferences, your goals, your values. Was self-funding your business something you always wanted from day one? Or did you ever think about raising money, but realize it wasn't the right fit? Like, how have you thought about that for yourself?
It was so hard, so difficult at the beginning that I dreamt of getting investors to come on board and I could hire somebody because I was doing customer service from like a VPN in East Africa. I mean, this is crazy. I was dealing with, my warehouse. I was dealing with orders. I was dealing with boutique orders. I was dealing with, any online orders. It was really crazy when I look back on it. So I did dream about bringing on investors. And we actually had people approach us early on, said everything right. It was amazing. We're going to make this an amazing company. And they put stuff into their contract, which was not favorable for me.
Mm.
So it was, they had sort of slid those in there and I had somebody review it because that's the other amazing thing right now is we have so many resources at our fingertips. I know that I am not a contract lawyer. I know where my weaknesses are. It's not, so I hired somebody via Upwork, which has everybody
Amazing.
has access to, who just reviews contracts and specialized in these kind of contracts. And he was able to look at that and pull out things and say, this is not like they don't have your best interest at heart. They're not looking for a fair deal. They're looking to throw in some extra things to sort of stack everything in their favor. And I thought, okay, I've worked really hard on this. It was amazing. And I'm so grateful every day for those investors because I stepped back then and said, okay, I'm going to do this. We'd already gotten sort of through that initial launch and lift and just kept taking one step in front of the other, in front of the other, started bringing people on resources when we can. I hired my first employee from East Africa just to start helping me at trade shows and with some of the spreadsheets. So it was, a journey. I paid employee number one before I was taking a salary.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just that constant. You're building something and you're starting small and then you're just building a little bit more and a little bit more. And then it just started to take hold and get traction. And we started to see celebrities in our pajamas. And that was really exciting. But I want to go back to the fact that we were only just a kid's pajamas, I think for 1 year. And then in 2016, people asked us to make adult pajamas because our quality was so good. And we said, of course we can. That'll be 100% cotton or 100% silk or whatever it is. It's very easy to make chemical-free pajamas in adult styles. So we did that. And now our adult pajamas outsells our kids' pajamas. So we're now
Amazing.
truly pajamas for the whole family.
Interesting. And did you see I always find it so fascinating that, companies, you launch with one product that gains momentum, you have product market fit and you come out with another product and that becomes the hero product. And you're like, it's so fascinating because you never know how the business will build. But did it become the hero product like that first year you were in business with the adult pajamas or did that come over time?
So I think that we already had the traction so these classic pajamas. Prince George was wearing our pajamas when he met President Obama in 2016.
Yeah, I have a million questions. I know we're jumping around a lot, but tell me more about that moment because that is huge. Did you send your product to them? Were you shocked? Like, what did that look like for you behind the scenes?
No, we didn't send our product. We were just as shocked as everybody else. And so it was really this moment. And it was a very challenging moment in my life when it happened. It was right when I was having my fourth son. So he was a bit of a surprise. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah, I was like, 4 kids. How did she do it? Oh my gosh.
But that brought me back to the US from East Africa for the last Christmas with my dad. So 2 weeks after my fourth son was born, my dad passed away from pancreatic cancer. And it was this really difficult moment in my life where I had 4 little kids. My husband was back in East Africa because the government did not, up until 8 years ago, when my fourth son was born, the government did not have a policy to bring the husband for the birth. If you brought the husband for the birth, you had to pay for it yourself. You had to take your personal leave. And then you certainly couldn't stay there for as long as you can't fly with a newborn until 6 weeks internationally. So I was on my own with a newborn and three other little guys. My dad had just passed away, and my husband was back in East Africa. And so that was a really tough time, as you can imagine. And then on April 23rd, I woke up and Prince George was wearing our pajamas.
The life of an entrepreneur, it's like you're going through all this hardship in a difficult moment, and then you wake up and you just see, I'm sure you saw quite a bit of traction for your business at the time, right? When Prince George was
Yes.
wearing your pajamas.
If it's good enough for Princess Catherine, I guess it definitely is appealing. So that was wonderful. And at that point, I thought, gosh, maybe I should hire some PR or something like that to promote this, because this is a big deal. At the time, we were getting all of the celebrities, or so many amazing celebrities were already wearing our pajamas. Jimmy Fallon was sending our pajamas to stars with his book that he had written. So we were really lucky in those regards. But then we thought, okay, maybe we should be putting some investment into this area.
Got it. So you thought about PR after the fact, after you had a hit piece that they really took that and would send it out to different outlets. That's the first time you brought in PR. Got it.
Yeah, because I think we were getting so, and we were growing sort of naturally, organically. And we're talking about very small numbers. We're talking about growing from like 250 to 500, 500 to like a million. You're not talking about, bank breaking, revenue breaking numbers. It really started small, this cadence, and then it built into like a wave.
I love that. And I think it's so interesting because it's still incredible growth. So I won't say it's slow growth, but it's like manageable growth. It's still, you're figuring out your systems, you're growing. I know people always would ask me when we launched, we've only been in business now for 3 years, but they're like, Yasmin, are you going to do like a big marketing splash? We also haven't used PR. And I'm like, I just want to get it out there and figure things out behind the scenes before we really grow. Cause that's very stressful too. And we're also self-funded. So I love that you brought that up because I think that's such a approachable way to grow a business.
And I think that's lost. I think for many, many years, it was churn and burn, right? It was grow as fast as you can, path to profitability. I've heard a lot of that. That was over the last 10 years, sort of before the pandemic. And I think there's really something to be said for growing slowly. And then also what you're doing is you're starting to scale very slowly. You're also improving the product, improving your website, improving everything along the way. Whereas if you went from 0 to 50 million right away, you wouldn't have the luxury of that. You would be backpedaling, trying to fix everything up as you're going. I think there's a real beauty and sensibility in slow growth until you're ready to then ignite it and then maybe bring on investors or whatever you decide you want to do at that point, or scale into retail. But I think that there really is something about growing in that more organic way that gets lost because people want to talk about their millions. And if you're I've seen other successful CEOs, talk about how much money they raised as being their point of success. But you don't know if that company was ever profitable or if it ever, I think if you're hanging your hat on how much you were able to raise, I think you need to go back and look at, were they profitable? Were they scaling? But it's a different path now, I think, than was popular, certainly in the 2000s and 2010s.
It's true. We had the founder of a business called Havenly on our podcast. This must have been like 2 years ago. I can't remember. It was a while back, but she mentioned the same thing. She's like, we were raising money and I had all these people text me saying, congratulations. Oh my gosh. She's like, why are they congratulating me? It just means we're not profitable and I need more money. And I'm like, that is so interesting. And she was very real around, with the behind the scenes of that. But yeah, it's so fascinating. And I want to go back to something you did because I think it just shows how scrappy you are. And I think that's such a core quality that you have for building a business that I think is worth talking about is when you were potentially bringing on investors, you didn't have a contact in your close circle who was able to review the contract, but you went on Upwork, which I use often, especially in the early days where you can find different providers and you found someone who was an expert. So you didn't put that pressure on yourself of like, I don't know what to do, or I feel like I can't read this contract. You really thought resourcefully of like, who can I find? What can I do? And I think it sounds so basic, but I think that skill set is huge for entrepreneurship and building businesses because you don't have all the answers. You don't know everything. You were never in this business. And it just shows you've been that way from day one. So I just wanted to highlight that. And I'm curious, kind of like reflecting back on your career, working for the CIA and now being an entrepreneur, are there any skills that you found translatable into what you're doing today from the past?
Yes. In fact, this is something I've thought about is that I do believe for starters that you have to have a certain amount of risk tolerance to start your own business. You have to have a firm stomach, I think, versus, and I think you have to be an optimist as well. It's interesting. Somebody who is has a more pessimistic view of the world doesn't think a company is going to go well. Or that's something that somebody has mentioned, and I totally agree with that. But so risk tolerance is something that had or learned or served me well at the agency and also served me well as CEO. I think risk mitigation is the second part of that, is making sure that you aren't taking unnecessary risks with your team or your company. And if you are, like, you got to cover your bases. We had a shipment with over $1 million of silk pajamas get stolen last January, and we had covered our costs. So it was insured for its cost value, which would have been probably close to 4 million at retail. But first of all, it wasn't the end of the world because nobody died. Second of all, we had it insured at cost. You have to make sure you're doing smart things like that as you go forward, that it wasn't the end of the world. Nobody died. So it's about perspective as well.
It's so true because sometimes when you're in the nitty gritty, it can feel like the world is ending. Like when you're just working all the time, especially in the early days, you're trying to get something out. That my husband always reminds me, he's like, you need perspective. And you're right. It's not the end of the world. No one's dying. The business is still going. And I think having that conversation with yourself is so important because things can feel much more intense, especially as a founder when you're putting your money behind something. So I love that. Like that's a great way to be able to still have joy in your life and not that stress that I think some entrepreneurs do have. And it's tough. And I think burnout is real. So I just love that mental exercise that you do. Is there anything else that you do? Because, you've clearly been doing this for quite some time now and it's all encompassing. You have 4 younger children, or maybe they're not younger anymore, which is awesome. Is there anything that you do on a weekly basis that kind of allows you to not hit that burnout? Because I'm sure you still are working, quite a bit growing this business.
I think something that's really key is being able to step away and turn off your computer, put your phone on do not disturb. I think it's very difficult when you're running your own company or when you have your skin in the game, so to speak. I think it's so valuable. And you want to know what else is even more valuable?
Tell me.
Oh my gosh, is actually going on vacation for a week and not working the entire time. It took me years to learn that. It really did, because for so long I didn't have the team built because, again, we were growing very slowly. But stepping away out of the day to day, not only does it help your team grow, because now they might not be coming to you with some of the issues that they know that they can handle, but it's just easy to ask you when you're right there. But when you step away, you also get to strategize. You also get to sit there. The last time I took a 1 week vacation, now my team is nervous. I came back and I had 11 pages of notes
Oh my God, I'm
of kind of
sure.
where I wanted to bring the guy. They're like, oh my God, how many pages? How many pages? Because you're stepping away and you're not thinking about all of the different meetings that you have going on. Boom, 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 boom. And there's another thing that people who are still early on their journey is bucket meetings. We started doing bucket meetings instead of scattershot dealing with things every single day. You do marketing meetings on Tuesday, retail meetings on Wednesday, finance meetings on Thursday, and you can meet with the whole team on these days. So you're not just constantly putting out fires that are coming into your inbox or meeting to meeting to meeting. You start to group them together. And then the CEO, once you get to a certain size, is so much better. Your time is better spent working on the business than in the business and figuring out, the vision, the strategy, and then getting the right people in the right seats as you grow. But one of those important things, which you mentioned earlier, is also a CEO doesn't have to be good at everything, or a founder or any person on this world does not have to be good at everything. It's knowing what your strengths are, knowing what your weaknesses are, hiring into those weaknesses. I think self-awareness is a really critical aspect to being successful in whatever job you have. What are you good at? What do you enjoy? What do you need to work on? Or what do you just not want to deal with it all. Like if you have me as an accountant, you're going to have a very bad day. I can do accounting,
Yeah.
but I don't think you, I can do it when I need to. But let me tell you what, my CFO is so much better than that. I have an amazing team of people that I have brought on because, I know where my skill set is.
I love that. And I think having that awareness, because sometimes we can put so much pressure that we need to have all the answers. But I love what you also said, like you reinvested back in the company and you slowly built that team. Like even I remember starting out, I was doing everything and the first person was an operations person. And then another person was a content manager who helped because we were doing so much content. So it's just a slow build. And even 4 years in now or 3 years in, I'm like, oh, I can breathe a little bit because I've brought in team members to kind of take off things that drag in my energy. And, every day I'm still doing things that I have to do because we're still small and that's just any business, right? You're not waking up every day being like, I love every aspect of it. You love the mission, but I love that you have slowly built the team. And one thing that you said that I think is so simple, but so critical is pulling out and going on do not disturb. Like even if you're not able to do that week vacation or even go on vacation, like even one day, it's still even hard for me to do that. Like to take my phone, like actually put it on do not disturb. I know it's so critical, but it's this like weird addiction. I'm like, I definitely am noticing a lot of patterns for myself. Maybe I need to be in control all the time, but it's just very interesting to hear you taking that step back has been so crucial because I think so many entrepreneurs don't give themselves that break. And I think going back to what you said about perspective, if you don't take those breaks, you have zero perspective around like what's going on in the world. So I know that was a lot, but I just loved everything that you kind of said.
You slow down to go faster. And I really found that I could go into my Mondays ready to tackle everything. Like with that zest of a month that a Monday morning should have when I stepped away on Saturday and Sunday. And I don't always do that. Sometimes there is something that like steps up or something like that. But the best weekends are the ones where I get to step away and then I'm ready with a fresh perspective on Monday morning. And that's where I'm also the most valuable to my team and to my company.
Totally. And might be a more tactical question, but Sundays I spend a lot of time just kind of catching up on loose ends from the week before and planning my week. So going into Monday, do you kind of spend time doing that? Or do you ever feel those Sunday I mean, you said you don't have those Sunday scaries, but like, when are you kind of planning and staying organized of the week? Or are you doing that along the way?
I think I try to consistently stay organized, but then if I can do it Sunday. If I took a good Saturday off and went and watched a ton of sports games for my kids or whatnot, then I feel like sometimes I can sneak in on Sunday and look at my calendar and just make sure that everything is set up the way that it needs to be. I think also, having a strong team really helps as well. But then I can ride into Mondays and I'm also a morning person.
Oh, that's great.
I love my mornings, but I am terrible at night and my kids always want to talk at night and I'm reading my kids, I'm reading them a bedtime story and I'm falling asleep and my son's like, Mom, just stop. You're asleep. And I'm wondering what I'm reading because something is still coming out of my mouth, but I fell asleep. But I am a morning person. And if I need to, I can get up at 4 a.m. and crush through emails like nobody's business from 4 to 7 a.m. I don't recommend it unless you're going to be ready to fall asleep reading to your kids at 8:30 at night. But, it works. It really works for me because the house is quiet. I can enjoy my cup of coffee and,
Yes.
get to it.
Oh my gosh, that's my dream. My husband operates like you. He's a morning person. So if he needs to catch up on stuff and he's also an entrepreneur, he'll do that. He'll just wake up super early, knock it out before, the team comes. I'm more of a night owl. So I've always wanted to be a morning person, but I could see that definitely working out for you. So one question I have, which I think is so interesting is I'm curious to get your perspective around stress, right? Working in the crazy conditions of working in the CIA, I'm sure there was one level of stress. How do you compare it to what you're kind of navigating now as an entrepreneur?
Excellent question. I think when I was at the agency, let's remove the whole war zone part of it. But in your normal day to day, you might be gearing up for an operation and maybe you'll be in a really high level of stress during the operation or during the meeting or doing whatever you're doing. And then you would go back to the embassy and you would write it up or you'd go back to your office, wherever and you'd write it up and your stress levels would be really low because you're writing a bunch of really, really boring reports about all different aspects of whatever meeting or operation that you just had. When you're running your own company, especially when it's a new company, every single day is something new. Every single day you're worried, especially like a little company needs it's like a little baby. It needs more attention when it's small and it's learning how to crawl and then it's learning how to walk. So there's a lot of that energy that you need when it's new because you're afraid if you get the wrong order, that could be your it could put your company out of business or if something really bad happened or whatever. There was always this thought of, is this going to work? Is it not going to work? And then as it gets bigger and bigger, the challenges get bigger. The questions get bigger, the funding gets bigger, the revenue numbers get bigger, the sales targets get bigger. Everything is sort of it kind of grows. You know how they say little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems? Yeah. Sort of like that. Little companies, little problems, but you still have bigger ones. But then you're not also worried about it necessarily going out of business. You get to a certain point in your company's growth where you know that there's little hiccups here and there, but it is that resilience. And I truly believe in resilience, that everybody falls down. Every company has challenges. Every person has challenges, but it's getting back up and it's about moving forward that makes you unstoppable.
And what would you say is your own why, right? I mean, to wake up and build that resiliency and to step back up when you lost, somebody stole your silk and you have difficult moments. Like, where does that internal motivation come from for you? And I'm curious, has that changed over different courses of your life as well?
I think early on, it would have been to keep myself safe from my children so that I would never be worried about them growing up without a mom. I think that was very clearly my early why. And now I've got a whole new why. And I think it's just to show I think it's how big can we build it? This is amazing. It's to show everyone like women can do anything. Mm-hmm. And I truly mean that. I'm really a huge fan of, right now women get less than 4% of investor funding. I think giving women that equal spot in every opportunity, I think is something that I was surprised when I moved back to the US after having lived in all of these developing countries where women didn't necessarily have a seat at the table, to come back to the US and see that we still have a ways to go to truly be treated as equals in this, certainly the business world, among other worlds as well.
Oh my gosh. Well, you're definitely paving the way, and it blows my mind. And also, I think I haven't looked at the latest stats, but like 3 or 4% of women break the $1 million in revenue mark for their business. And I'm like, what? There's so many incredible women entrepreneurs out there. So yeah, a lot of passion around that, but so glad you're sharing your story and, showing what's possible, because I think that's so critical. So thank you for that. I love just hearing your why and how it's transitioned over time.
And wait, the final why, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, please, I want to hear.
There is the Mary Oliver, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And then you think, made it this far without any of the resources that I have now. I started this company without the amazing team, without the amazing opportunities, without so much that has come since along the way, with everything that has sort of come from other things. The networking is so important that I think we can do this. We can do 100 million and beyond. It is kind of it's been a wonderful adventure from that part.
Yes, 100%. And sometimes I think just like this one beautiful, crazy life you live, I'm like, there's not enough years. I feel like there's so much that I want to do and I need to pace myself. As long as I always tell my husband, I'm like, as long as you're making an impact and you're reflecting on like different challenges that you've done, different things that you've tried, like even looking at your journey places and having those experiences, like you're really living a well-rounded life. And I think that's so important. So I love that reminder, because sometimes, we can be complacent in our day-to-day and not remember like how lucky are we to be alive for another day? Like what else can we do in this life? So that's just so awesome to hear. That's something that's been on your mind too. And I'd love to end on one last question. I'm just curious, what do you think has been maybe the hardest or most surprising thing about building your business to date?
I think I was surprised originally. I mean, it really is not for I don't want to say faint of heart. You really do have to have a certain amount of risk tolerance, because there's so many places along the way where you have to make decisions, where you have to sort of walk through that next round of fire or whatever it is that the challenge is. Sometimes it's like a roller coaster. The greatest thing and the worst thing can happen within an hour of themselves. And you're thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. And then you're like, oh no, this is horrible. Something comes in and you're just all over the place going, wait a minute, what's happening? But it is all part of that thing that comes together. And I did read somewhere that being an entrepreneur was one of the most challenging, because there are so many things thrown at you and you never know where it's coming from on which given day.
Yeah, it's so true. Like I literally have experienced what you said, like a really low low and a really big high where I'm like, I don't even know how to feel my emotions at this point. Like, is there, it's just, you're
Yeah.
like in this neutral place and now nothing really phases me. It's even going back to my personal life, like things that I used to think were a big issue. I'm like, who cares? Like, it's not a big deal, once you kind of like manage those highs and lows on a daily basis. So I love that. But Emily, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for being with us. I love everything you've built. I'm cheering you on. Can't wait to see all the other incredible products that you'll continue to create. But thank you so much for being with us today.
It was really a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Yasmin.